with the masseter, the muscles of mastication. Fifth, trigeminal cranial nerve. It is a mixed nerve, isn't it? It has both sensory and the motor component. So we should know what are the muscles of mastication. First is the masseter muscle, then temporalis, medial and lateral pterygoids. Okay, and a muscle called tensor tympani of middle ear also is sometimes included as muscles of mastication. So mainly you should remember masseter, temporalis, medial and lateral pterygoids. But the motor fiber of fifth cranial nerve also supplies tensor tympani of middle ear. Now how do we examine? The subject is asked to open his mouth and show the teeth. This you have done in practicals, isn't it? Normally the jaw is symmetrical. If there is paralysis on one side, the jaw will deviate to the side of paralysis. The healthy pterygoid pushes it to that side. Okay? The subject is then asked to clench his teeth, not show his teeth, but clench his teeth. Okay, when the subject clenches his teeth, the temporalis and masseter muscles, they contract and they become equally prominent on both the sides, that is on left side as well as on the right side. The muscles can be palpated to note if there is any difference in the strength of the contraction. Okay, the subject is asked to open his mouth and move the mandible from side to side, because the pterygoids, we are now testing the pterygoids, medial and lateral pterygoids. Okay, that's why the subject is asked to move his mouth and move the mandible from side to side. The another point is, we ask the person, we do the jaw jerk. This is also known as maxillary reflex. How do we do it? We do it by placing a finger on the chin, below the lower lip, with the mouth open, and we strike it with a percussion hammer. Okay? Don't break the teeth when you do this. Okay? Be very delicate. The response is closure of the mouth. Jaw jerk or the maxillary reflex, it is tested by placing a finger on the chin, below the lower lip, with the mouth open. The mouth is open, okay? And we strike it. The response is there is closure of the mouth, and normally this jerk is hardly detectable, but it is created when there is upper motor neuron lesion. Both the afferent and the efferent path of this reflex is along the fifth cranial nerve, that is the trigeminal nerve, and the center of the jerk, that is jaw jerk or the maxillary reflex, is in the pons, that is the brainstem, pons. Okay. The mandibular division of the fifth cranial nerve also supplies the parasympathetic fibers of the salivary gland, which you already know. So these are the steps which tell us how we examine the muscles of mastication. Okay. First is the muscles of mastication and masseter muscle, temporalis muscle, medial and lateral. You should also remember that tensor tympani is also supplied by motor. The procedure is, we take consent when we ask the subject to open his mouth and show the teeth. Usually the jaw is symmetrical. Paralysis on one side, the jaw deviates to the side of the paralysis. Okay. Why? Because the healthy pterygoid pushes it to that side where it is paralyzed. The second point is, we ask the subject to clench his teeth. When the person clenches his teeth, the temporalis and the masseter muscles, they contract and they become equally prominent on both the sides. The muscles can be treated to note if there is any difference in strength of the contraction. Now coming to examination of the muscles of facial expression. The facial nerve or the seventh cranial nerve It supplies all the superficial muscles of the face and scalp. Okay. So how do we test the motor function of the facial nerve? We test the upper face by these procedures. The subject is asked to look up and wrinkle the skin on his forehead. That is, we are checking for occipitofrontalis muscle. Okay. Normally, the wrinkling of the skin is symmetrical on both the sides, left and right side. Then by asking the subject to frown, the corrugator supercilii muscles, they are tested. Testing the various muscles. I hope the sound is clear. Then the person is asked to shut his eyes as tightly as possible. Mouth also get drawn up. The examiner then is to open one and then the other eye. Normally, it is impossible to do so against the subject's wishes. Orbicularis oculi is the muscle that we are going to test. We are testing. When one tries to shut the eyes tightly, the eyeballs roll upwards. This is a normal response called Bell's phenomenon. In Bell's palsy, when the patient closes his eyes, the upward movement of the eyeball becomes obvious because of the closure of the affected eye is not possible, because the closure of the eye that is affected is not possible. Now, how to test the lower part of the face? The nasolabial folds on both sides are observed, which are normally symmetrical. Paralysis on one side causes flattening of the folds on that side. It also affects facial symmetry at rest or during voluntary facial movements. The subject is asked to rubber teeth or to whistle. Normally, the face remains symmetrical. The muscle being examined is levator angularis muscle. Paralysis of one side causes the angle of mouth to be drawn toward the healthy side, while that on the paralyzed side remains stationary. Please compare this with the examination of the muscles of mastication, which is supplied by the fifth cranial nerve, trigeminal nerve. Here see, we are talking about the facial nerve. Paralysis of one side causes the angle of mouth to be drawn toward the healthy side, while that on the paralyzed side remains stationary. The buccinator is also involved in whistling. The subject is asked to inflate his mouth with air and blow out his cheeks. This is how we test the muscle, buccinator muscle. Each inflated cheek is then tapped with a finger. If there is paralysis, the air escapes easily through the angle of mouth on the paralyzed side. The subject is asked to depress the lower lip. Depressor labii inferioris and quadratus labii inferioris are being tested. In case of paralysis, asymmetry is observed. Okay. Facial paralysis results quite commonly from lesions of upper or lower motor neurons. Okay. To differentiate between these, it is important to remember that seventh cranial nerve innervating the muscles of upper face are under bilateral cortical motor control, while the facial nuclei supplying the lower face are controlled from the opposite motor cortex 1 lead. Now let's see how we examine the muscle tone. Here we will be examining the muscle tone of the upper limbs. Muscle or muscular tone refers to continuously maintained state of the slight tension or tautness in the healthy muscles even when they appear to be at rest. An increase in tone is called hypertonia, so the decrease in tone is known as hypotonia. Muscle tone is tested by noting the resistance that is offered to passive movements, and this is done by examiner on various joints of the subject. The examiner joint to be tested and passively moves the joint through the full range of its movements. With which a joint can thus be moved is noted compared with a similar joint on the opposite side. I repeat, is tested by noting the resistance that is offered to the passive movements done by the examiner on various joints of the subject. The examiner holds the limb on either side of a joint to be tested and passively moves the joint through the full range of its movements. The difficulty with which a joint can thus be moved is noted and compared with a similar joint on the opposite side. The examiner holds the forearm of the subject with one hand and alternately flexes and extends the wrist with the other hand. Tone at the fingers, elbow and shoulders is tested in a similar manner. In lower limbs, passive movements are done at ankle, knee and hip, and it is compared on two sides. In case of hypertonia, where the tone of the muscle is increased, the patient's muscles resist the passive movements while the muscles become free and the joints can be extended. So this is how we examine the tone of the muscle. Okay. This diagram shows the monosynaptic reflex arc for stretch reflexes. Stretching the muscle as a tap on its tendon excites the muscle spindle receptors, which in turn stimulate alpha motor neuron to cause a brief muscle contraction. Okay. Muscle tone, the slight tautness in a muscle implies the contraction of a small number of motor units, and these motor units are scattered throughout the muscle, but a number which is not enough to cause movement at a joint. If the tendon of a muscle, say biceps, is cut from its insertion, the muscle shortens. That means this gives that there is a proof of tone. Muscle tone is a spinal stretch reflex actually, static reflex phenomenon, which results from a slight stretch of the muscle spindle scattered in between the ordinary, that is the extrafusal muscle fibers. The afferent impulses from the stretch receptors of the spindles goes, and enter the spinal cord, where they reflexly excite and cells, that is the alpha motor neurons. These alpha motor neurons are being stimulated. Then these neurons in turn discharge out of step and at a low rate, which leads to contraction of a certain number of muscle fibers, and this is manifested as muscle tone. Damage to any part of the reflex arc abolishes muscle tone. Okay, any part of the reflex arc, if it is damaged, then the muscle tone will be absent. Muscle tone does not produce fatigue because only a small number of muscle fibers contract at a time. These fibers relax and another group takes up activity. They are working in rotation. This process of rotation of activity prevents the occurrence of fatigue. It is the same picture. But what is the cause of stretching the muscle to start? Okay, now let's see. What is hypertonia? Hypertonia is increase in tone. It occurs in lesions of upper motor neuron lesions, that is the corticospinal tracts and extrapyramidal systems. When they are damaged, tone is increased. Spasticity term refers to hypertonia, which occurs when there is lesion in corticospinal system. The increased tone is of clasp knife type. When the limb is moved, maximum resistance is offered at once, but it suddenly gives way after some effort on the part of the examiner. Spasticity is therefore a form of rigidity which is sensitive to stretch, that is, stretch sensitive. It is usually maximum in flexors of the arms and extensors of the legs. That's why in hemiplegic patients, there is spasticity in flexors of the arms and extensors of the legs. That's why circumduction occurs or hemiplegic gait occurs. Rigidity. The hypertonia of rigidity results from diseases of the basal ganglia, like Parkinsonism, and is called extrapyramidal rigidity. It may be of cogwheel type, in which the resistance to passive movement decreases in jerky steps, probably a combination of tremor and rigidity, or it can be lead pipe type, in which resistance is felt throughout the passive movement. The rigidity of Parkinsonism is commonly accompanied by akinesia, Akinesia means poverty of movement. Okay. Hypotonia is seen in lower motor neuron disease and cerebellar disease. Passive movement is unusually free and frequently through a greater range than normal. Power or strength of the muscle. We often get confused during examination of tone and power of the muscle. To test the muscle strength in the upper limbs of the subject provided, what we do is we ask the person, we observe how a person walks, stands up from sitting or supine position, shakes hands or performs other everyday movements such as buttoning a shirt or combing the hair. They can provide a quick and reliable means for assessing muscle weakness or paralysis if there is present, if any of them are present. The muscle power at big and small joints is then tested by asking the subject first to move parts of the body and then against resistance. I hope you remember this. We ask the subject to move the parts of the body, that is, the active movement is done. Then we do the same. We ask the subject to do the same movement, but we give resistance, that is, against resistance of the examiner's hand. And it is compared with similar muscles of the opposite limb. We examine for all the muscles. For opponent's policies, we ask to touch the tips of all his fingers with the tip of his thumb. The examiner opposes each movement with his index finger or thumb. Okay, so you can see that there is active movement first done, then we give resistance. Active movement against resistance. Then lumbricals, interossei, okay, all the muscles are examined. The subject, to examine the power or strength of the muscle, of the supraspinatus muscle, what we do is, subject is asked to lift his arm straight out at right angles to his side. The first 30 degrees of his movement is brought about by supraspinatus muscle. 30 degrees, the first 30 degrees of the movement is brought about by supraspinatus muscle, and the rest 60 degrees is carried out by deltoid muscle. Okay. Now, grading of muscle power is grade 0 to grade 5. Grade 0 means complete paralysis and grade 5 means optimum power. The word paresis means weakness and paralysis means no power, total loss of power. Now coming to stance and gait. The term stance refers to the way of standing on one's 2 feet. The term gait refers to the manner or the style or the pattern of walking. So there is a bit difference between stance. Stance means the way of standing on one's 2 feet, while gait is the way of walking. Okay, stance is standing, gait is style of walking. The biped stance requires the integration of a large amount of sensory information, that is, from the proprioceptors from feet, legs, trunk, neck, and this is synthesized with visual and vestibular information. The overall picture of the postural position in space occurs unconsciously in the middle cerebellum. Please remember this one. It occurs unconsciously in middle cerebellum, basal ganglia and cerebral cortex. If there is any tendency to sway, that is deviate to one or the other side, it is adjusted by muscles of the legs and trunk and even arms. So gait is dependent on the same vestibular, proprioceptive and integrative systems as stance and balance. However, it requires direction from the central gait mechanism, which is located in the frontal lobes, basal ganglia, brainstem, and descending motor system. There is a continuous adjustment of muscle tone during walking and other movements. Okay, so when we studied gait in our practicals, we have studied about the different kinds of gaits that are present in diseases. Like in hemiplegia, the gait present is hemiplegic gait or spastic gait or circumduction, because the tone is increased in the flexors of the hand of the upper limb and extension of the lower limb. Okay, so circumduction is there. hemiplegic gait or spasticity. In a disease of cerebellum, the person sways to the side of the lesion. It is also known as drunken gait or reeling gait or cerebellar gait. When a person is having sensory ataxia, the person has high stepping gait. The person has stamping gait. When a person is suffering from central obesity, or there is a pregnant lady in second or third trimester of pregnancy, the gait is waddling gait, and it hurt in our ankles and we walk with difficulty, that is called limping gait. Okay, a person who is suffering from Parkinson's disease takes a stooped posture, has pill rolling tremor, and walks with short shuffling gait, or also known as festinant gait is another type. Okay, so these are the various gaits that occur. So this much for today, class. You have any questions?